This is Tao Tao and his owner Kun Sompong. Tao Tao is a dog in a million, probably Thailand's luckiest and most famous dog. He's the only victim of Thailand's dog meat trade to be reunited with his owner. Thousands of dogs are stolen or traded every year in Thailand. They end up brutalised and killed, either in the illegal export trade to Vietnam or in the killing places of Thailand. Then they are butchered and eaten. In the past year, police and border units have been catching traders and confiscating the dogs. This is the story of what happened to the dogs that were saved and sent to the government shelters. Nice dogs, aren't they? Someone loved them before they went through hell with the dog meat crime gangs. When they were rescued and taken into government care, they were seen as the lucky ones. There were about 2,000 of them when I took these photos. I felt like crying when I saw the pitiful few left alive, sick, beyond even despair, dying in a filthy cage on the Myanmar border. This is the Mekong River, the border between Thailand and Laos. It's the wet end of the smuggling routes that start at Ban Tarer, the centre of the illegal dog meat export trade, and end in the dog-killing places around Hanoi. Police have grabbed Thai dog traffickers. Now the brutalised dogs, packed 8 or more to a small cage, are being rescued and trucked away. They're heading for a government shelter. What is that going to mean for them? You can add quite a few to that number. A couple of hundred at Kamarat shelter, some more at Nakhon Phanom. The last of the Buriram dogs dying in misery. So in a year, more than 5,000 dogs died or went missing from the so-called safe havens of the government shelters. And even that figure does not include the dogs left at a police post to die in the sun, and dogs handed back to traffickers for certain death. We'll get back to those issues in later video reports. This is northeast Thailand, also known as Isan, where the dog export trade is organised. These black crosses represent the routes for the illegal exports. This is Ban Pang, north of Nakhon Phanom, the old Mekong smuggling route that's still used. This one's Won Yai, south of Nakhon Phanom. And that's Ban Tarer, near Sakon Nakhon, where the whole lot is organised. That's the centre of it all. This is the first of the dog shelters at Nakhon Phanom. They still have a lot of dogs there and more going in. This is the second of the dog shelters at Buriram, south of the town, down near the Cambodian border. And this is Kamarat, the third, now quite on the front line for dogs held after smuggler arrests. The chain of responsibility goes back to Bangkok. Parliament? The government certainly, but in an everyday sense the Department of Livestock Development. This is Nakhon Phanom dog shelter, right on the front line in the fight against the dog meat traders. The first big police action against the dog traffickers was on August 12, 2011. The Nakhon Phanom governor gave the figure for the dogs held by police as 1,800. The problem of what to do with them was given to the livestock facility at Nakhon Phanom, without funds and with no one trained or experienced in handling dogs. Dogs are not livestock. so the department has never had any funds or programs to help them. The shelter staff had to improvise as they went along. The generous Thai people donated more than 20 million baht, but even that did not save most of the dogs. In the next 5 months, despite the care of the concerned staff, more than 1,100 of the dogs died of disease, eating problems and the harsh climate, according to local livestock sources. On December 26, 2011, police stopped a truck in Nakhon Phanom province and took 350 dogs from the smugglers. Then there was a spate of arrests in January and February 2012. Those months are the high season for the dog meat trade. The law enforcement agencies were making a big point to the people running the trade and to the people of Thailand, who overwhelmingly opposed the dog meat trade. For the livestock department and the dogs, it was the start of another round of lethal problems. On January 12, the Navy, leading a border guard unit, took 800 dogs from smugglers in Ban Pang district. The next day, police took 500 dogs from traffickers in a roadside stop, and the following day they found another 500 left in a wooded area. In March, 47 dogs arrived at Nakhon Phanom shelter after a bust in Mukdahan province. If you add these together, you can see that the number of dogs that went to Nakhon Phanom shelter from August to March totaled around 4,000. How many of those survived? A distemper epidemic struck soon after the 2012 dogs started arriving. The dogs had not been vaccinated, and all through January, February, and into March they were dying, sometimes at a rate of 30 a night. On April 22, the head of the shelter gave the official figure for the number of dogs at the shelter as 1,160. Some of the dogs had been rehomed. A generous figure would be 500. So that leaves about 2,300 missing believed dead in this war over money. Money the traffickers make from selling the dogs in Vietnam, and money that the livestock department cannot get from the government to fund proper programs. Do you know how much money goes from the government to the livestock department and police to look after dogs?
Yeah, they get the budget every year, but not cover on the dog trade, but other responsibility for other responsibility, but not for the dog, but for livestock like chicken, pig, and buffalo and cow, something like that, because those are directly trade for economic development.
They were certainly beautiful dogs that were sent to Buriram shelter. And this is what happened to them. This, death, missing without trace. Who knows the truth of it all? But these are the facts from the documentary investigation. The story of the Buriram tragedy began on January 12, 2012, when police raided a dog holding centre in the Bantarar area. They found, according to first reports, 5,000 dogs, but that was a wild guess, and the next day the police used the figure of 1,500 dogs in court proceedings. That was a more considered estimate, but it was wrong too. Livestock staff, backed by local political figures and police, began rescuing the dogs and clearing up the human health hazard of the crude holding centre. There was no money to care for the dogs. The provincial budget had nothing. The livestock budget had nothing. The police had nothing. So the top players in this determined rescue dug into their own pockets and bought food for the dogs. They were fed on day 2. Livestock staff documented the scene. They carefully counted the dogs, the survivors who had not escaped in the first hours of chaos. The figure was 1,968. Nakhon Phanom shelter, less than an hour away, could not take the dogs, and on day 3 of the rescue the Sakon Nakhon provincial governor ordered the dogs to be sent to Buriram shelter down on the Cambodian border. Technically, the police are responsible to the court for the dogs, but in this case they handed over responsibility for their lives to the livestock department. The provincial chief vet watched every move to make sure the dogs had the best chance of survival. At 2 p.m. on day 3, the first of 2 provincial trucks left for Buriram with 673 dogs on board, and at 8 p.m. the second left with 615 dogs. On day 4, 2 livestock trucks left with 680 dogs bound for Buriram. So far so clear. The Sakon Nakhon livestock vets count was 1,968 rescued. They'd sent trucks with specific numbers of dogs. The total sent was 1,968. Mr. Paisan, the head of the Buriram shelter, said he had received 1,900 dogs from Sakon Nakhon. Months later, when most of the dogs were dead and the rest dying, the livestock department's Bangkok headquarters said that only 1,300 dogs had been sent by Sakon Nakhon's livestock staff to Buriram shelter. All the dogs that had been taken into Buriram shelter towards the end of 2011 were reported to have died, at least 300. When I visited the shelter on February 15, it was a happy place. Kind staff, food being donated, rice meals being prepared for the dogs unable to take the dried food, shaded areas, lots of space in a huge enclosure, but no vets, no vaccinations, and no funding for the care of the dogs. The head of the shelter refused money donations. They had to go through the livestock website. Food donations included a truck full of rice. But it was all an illusion, wasn't it? The dogs, happy for the moment, were in lethal peril. On February 14, the day before my visit, another 184 dogs had been trucked in after police caught more traffickers. This took the total number of dogs in the shelter to 2,152. A few months later, in mid-June, when Sakon Nakhon staff and Bangkok volunteers visited the shelter, only about 350 dogs remained. That means 1,800 dogs had disappeared, and there was worse to come. When I visited the shelter 3 weeks later, there were only about 20 very sick dogs to be found. This was Buriram shelter on July 6, just 3 weeks after livestock staff and Bangkok volunteers saw around 350 dogs. It was strangely silent. The whole place, home to 2,000 dogs just a few months earlier, was empty apart from maybe 20 very sick dogs. No staff except a kind girl who gave us water but knew nothing. Not even any dogs hanging around outside. It looked like it had been cleared out. In the cage, these poor creatures. I looked for a place where the dogs might have been buried. There was little evidence of that. Most of the bodies, the shelter head said later, had been taken away by the livestock team dealing with dead animals. So what did happen to the dogs, especially the last 300 or 400? Mr. Paisan said the dogs had run away or died. He said he had looked after them well, spending his own money on buying food for them. At first he had been given help from other livestock facilities, and there were generous donations of food, but the staff were withdrawn and the food stopped coming. He called on the government to give money to support dogs in livestock care. He also guaranteed that none of the dogs, alive or dead, went back to the dog meat trade, but he could not say where the last of the dogs had gone. In Sakon-Nakhon, where livestock staff did everything possible to save the dogs when police arrested the traffickers, there was shock and disbelief at the news that the last of the dogs had vanished. They contacted the Bangkok headquarters for an explanation. From Sakon-Nakhon, the trail led to Bangkok, which has a thriving animal welfare protest lobby. On July 24, Mr. Churchai, the head of all dog shelters in Thailand, said Buriram shelter had been closed. All the dogs had been moved to Kanchanaburi shelter. And then he opened a new mystery by revealing official figures for Buriram. He said that it was only 1,300 dogs that were sent by Sakon-Nakhon to Buriram, and he showed paperwork to support that figure. He was clearly giving a truthful account of the situation as recorded at the livestock headquarters. But the Sakon-Nakhon staff counted the dogs. Then they counted them again, so they knew how many dogs were going into each truck, and the head of Buriram confirmed he had received 1,900 dogs. This means that 600 dogs disappeared somewhere from the official knowledge. Did they disappear just on paper, or did they disappear too in life? Mr. Churchai said that Buriram was unsuitable as a dog shelter and had been closed. The last dogs were sent to Kanchanaburi at the end of June, 113 in one truck, 155 on a second, and 70 on a third. That's a total of 338, about the number reported as disappeared from Buriram. There have been many sad moments during this documentary investigation into the dog meat trade. What I found at Kanchanaburi shelter was among the saddest. Those beautiful dogs sent to Buriram from Sakon-Nakhon, and here, hidden away near the Myanmar border, the pitiful survivors. 1,900 missing, these poor creatures existing, suffering, sick, depressed, living in a disgustingly filthy condition of a large caged area. There were fewer than 80 dogs compared with the 350 missing from Buriram and the 2,152 that were taken to Buriram in January and February. I could see no more Buriram dogs in the area as the shelter worker reluctantly showed me around. Later, in a phone call during my journey back to Bangkok, the head of the shelter said that he had more Buriram dogs in another place. Thai volunteers who visit the shelter logged only one truck of Buriram dogs. The ones I had seen, they gave those dogs the only vet help they received. A month later, on August 16, we went back to the shelter. It is situated more than 100 kilometres north of Kanchanaburi town at Tongpa Bumi, not far from the Myanmar border. The shelter head said he had received 331 Buriram dogs in 3 trucks. The first, he said, was in May and the last was in July. On that day, only 100 remained alive, he said, and we could see that they were dying. How could the livestock staff and the Bangkok volunteers see 350 dogs at Buriram in mid-June, if at least a third had already been received at Tongpa Bumi? I wonder if a child is still looking for this poor dog. Or maybe an adult is searching, desperately hoping the dog meat criminals have not stolen a love companion. The dogs are dying and their owners are suffering too. The investigation found many, many cases of this. The grandmother desperate to find the child's dog that she was looking after when it was stolen. The people who drove from one end of Isan to the other to find their dogs. The parents who lost their grown-up daughter's wonderful companion and the daughter's 4-day hunt among the rescued dogs. She did not find him. The atrocities against the dogs are also atrocities against the people. There are tears through most of Thailand as witness to that.
Most of the dog is a house dog, or they have the owner. Then they're not a stray dog. So usually they used to live in house. They never live like in the forest or outside like this. So they have the problem with the feeding, problem with the lifestyle, and it's really hard for them to cope with the sun and the temperature that's so hot like this. So that's one of the reasons that some of the dogs have been some of the dogs dying so quickly, not only from the infections but from malnutrition and from the stroke from the hot temperatures. There's many problems since most of them are house dogs. They are not stray dogs. So look, and some of them very small. I think I saw a lot of them that only less than 1 year old. Some of them are like 3 or 4 months old, and they had a lot of. Some of them are pregnant. Like last week, there are one dog that's pregnant and give 10 baby, and all of them are dying, already dead. 10 baby.
Do they look like the kind of dogs that people would give away or sell?
I don't think so. Most of them are cute and good looking, good marking. And I think they hunger for their owner because they like this. They need a hug. And I don't think that anyone will throw this dog away. And I think like that there's an owner that looking for their dog. Like this morning there are family that looking for that dog. And they're quite sad because they couldn't find their dog.
So love me, love my dog. You leave the road too long to break up. Love me, live my life and travel through it.